Don't keep.
Right, let's continue that particular discussion with the panelists. And I'll begin with you, Professor Gituro Wanaina, to just give a reaction on this, because yes, right now we can see the Omicron variant also is causing jitters. If you look at the US economy, we can see the stocks, they're beginning to tank, as it were. But here the governor is saying, let's just put our face straight like a Flintstone. We are not supposed to be getting all these jitters about the virus. Do you think we have any reason of concern right now, or we should be bullish, as he says?
I think the numbers, and I appreciate the governor, Daktari there, good job and providing those numbers. I think the issue of the coronavirus and the job are very important. There is a high correlation, if you wish, between getting the job and the economy growing. And you look at most developed economies, like Germany yesterday, they brought forward the jobbing of the young ones. I think we have to move in a very, very, very quick way in terms of the job. I think closing the economy or closing the economy, perhaps this might have a negative effect in terms of how we move forward. My take is that we really need to synthesize our people with respect of getting the job. That's the only way good. Even with the new variant Omicron, as we talk, there are reports coming that you have the two jobs, you have got that, you still have some resistance in it. And I think something we have to be extremely careful and perhaps alive to is that COVID here perhaps with us for some time. I don't see it going. It's perhaps the mitigating measures we take with it. But to me, I don't even see that as probably the most biggest challenge you have in our economy. It's probably the drought we are going through now, because that affects the food production. If you look at the CPI, food becomes extremely important. And I said before that in a nation which can't feed their people, perhaps is a nation destined for doom. So I think we perhaps take, how do we really cushion ourselves against the issue of drought, but more importantly, when you look at COVID, how do you get the job? But let's also point out there in the point where we see that hospitality really has suffered very, 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 very strongly because of that. And Daktari Njoroge, the CBK governor, I really agree with you. Kenyans, we are people of the last moment. I think if in education, I think the overbooking of the SGR is an indication of enhanced activities in December. And this is the point we have said before very, very strongly. If the hospitality industry could be more sensitive and have an opportunity, even differentiated costs for the local tourism. Because right now, what is bringing the hotels like Naivasha, conferences, Mombasa, is the local people. So you can target that and do market segmentation. My strongest view, and I think this one I can say with a lot of confidence, there's a very concerted effort to really address the issue or really look at the economies of this developing country. South Africa comes in very strongly in terms of tourism. So does Tanzania, Kenya. And the moment you have all these warnings, I think they are perhaps alarmists from these countries. It really cuts off tourists from those particular areas, which to some extent could be a very, very deliberate effort. And I think something which has come, you see the narrative that this variant is worse than them all, and it has come from South Africa. So don't go to those areas. So how do we then step back and leverage on our domestic tourism? As we come to December, the holiday season, the hotel industry perhaps should address that to me. But really to come back in terms of what we should be looking at the economy, let's get the jobs. Let's get the jobs. And that will help us move in the economy. Right. This is something we have to find a way of living with. It's perhaps will take more time than we thought.
Right. And I wonder what also will be your turn of thoughts on the projection by the CBK governor, very optimistic, very bullish about next year's, the economic outlook.
Thank you very much indeed. I think he's bullish because there is a positive mood in the country in respect of the what was feared earlier on the debilitating effects of COVID-19. I think people are now roughing it out. They are living with it. They are getting used to it, perhaps getting complacent at the edges, and that's a risk. But people are saying we will do things despite COVID. And I think that is very helpful indeed, is keeping the economy running. And as a result, I think I agree with the positive outlook on that. I just want to comment that the 10.1% that we are highlighting as one of the best in Africa. Remember that this is a quarter to quarter. It is that September quarter in relation to the previous September quarter. When we were in the middle of it, the closures were there, the moods were very, people were not feeling in any way seeing a future. People were in fear, as it were. And so that kind of growth is not unusual, but we should not, it just indicates that the economy picked up, but we should not think that Kenya now is a double-digit growth economy. I think that was an unusual thing because of the base. We're still, if we do about 5, 6, we're still doing well. So the outlook, I think, is generally good. I would agree with the forecast of the governor. But I want to also add very quickly that I'm glad that alternative voices are coming, like that of the central bank, saying economy is doing well, is doing as well as the vaccination systems go. If they go up, the economy will do even better. Because earlier on, we were only seeing the Minister of Health initially talking like a DC, like you must do this, you must do this, and if you get it, you'll go to quarantine and you'll pay for it and so on. That was corrected. But now I think people are going to realize that we are doing this for our own good, and it's not because I'll be arrested and I'll have to pay my way, and that the police are not going to find me and beat me up and so on. So I think that we are now maturing in this whole process. If we can carry it on like this, the people will become part of the, will become partners in this process rather than targets as it was earlier.
Thank you, thank you. And let's hear from you as well.
Yes, I totally understand why the CBK governor is very optimistic, just because people are learning to live in this new normal, right? So as was stated earlier, people were really afraid before, but now we're saying this is the new normal. This is how we're going to live, and we're going to have to make money, right? So I think what we are seeing going forward that is changing is people are looking inward domestically. People are looking at the opportunities in Africa. So even as we hear these stories of don't go to Southern Africa because of this new variant, people are still saying, no, this is Africa. You're trying to make things look worse in Africa, yet in the other continents, this COVID has affected them, and yet we're not stopping that. So we're seeing people saying that life has to go on. We have to do business. We're using technology, so there's going to be a lot of digital trade happening, which means still business will be going on. And so that is something great that we see that I understand why the governor is very, very, very optimistic. I do have to say when it comes to us living this new normal, there are a lot of people who are vaccinated, not a lot of, I mean, there are many people who are willing to be vaccinated, but there are others who are very cautious about being vaccinated. And the reason is because a lot of these vaccines are being manufactured outside Africa. We don't know what it is that we have put in our bodies. I'm vaccinated, but the people on the ground, when I talk to them, they are cautious. So I think even as we push for more vaccination, we still need to talk to our people and tell them, even as you go around doing your business, you really need to have preventive measures. You need to still mask up, sanitize, just do everything right. Because when you look at it in these different sort of developed countries, a lot of them are able to do the lockdown, right? Because a lot of people are able to work from home. But try doing that in Kenya. Very few people, just the middle class, who are able to work from home. But a lot of the people who are out there hustling actually have to get out. So, so what I'm saying, the way we're looking at it in regards to the developed world versus us in Kenya, we really need to be able to say, look, the economy has to open. I'm very glad the president did not lock down the country and say, look, COVID is here with us. We have to live in this new normal, but we do not want the spread of the disease. So get people vaccinated, but those who are not willing to get vaccinated, can we still encourage them to make sure that they're doing preventive measures to make sure that we're not spreading it? But I'm very optimistic to say business will go on in Africa, especially because of the AfCFTA. And business will go on because of digital trade that is happening, that I don't have to leave Kenya to do trade around do trade with other people. And I do have to say, when the president was talking about, in the State of the Nation, when he was talking about the businesses that have done really well in this season, most of the ones I remember were the companies that were actually part of global trade. A lot of them were doing business outside Kenya, and that's how they were making a lot of money. So that's also another thing that I'd like to encourage the business community is, besides Kenya, do trade outside Kenya. That's how you're going to survive and thrive in this season.
Right. Professor, I saw you staring at the list. You wanted to say something before I move on to this?
I really wanted to bring the point on you are bringing on. I think we should not let it go. I think the point you raised, I liked it, of thinking inwardly. And that's perhaps is something which is going to push us in terms of making our agenda here. And what I will talk about inwardly, looking at how do you leverage on the benefits. I'm happy of the conference happening today live with Ghana, Uganda, and Rwanda. And how do we think, if we're even looking at the companies, even when we're looking at the tourism. So I think, and that's a good point. But I think one of the things we have to be, and it's an opportunity for us to think in terms of any shock can come, then how do we manage that shock? Our market there, it's there, East African region. You take a tour Tanzania, you just drive. You go to Rwanda, you're driving. But I think what we need to be extremely cautious so that we actually taking the precautions. And I like Sakwa's point, Mheshimiwa, asante sana. I think when you approach things in a threatening way, people tend to do it. People want to do it. So as the Ministry of Health tells us, we'll put in, we'll do all that, I think it's something. But the last point I want to make is that I think there's a point we have to step back as Africans from this continent and look back and really, we look the projections which were given in the early 2020 that we die in millions, 10 million as such. I think there's something God loves about us, and it perhaps even goes to what our immune system is all about. And I think despite what Anne is saying, I think we need also to get our traditional kind of food systems. We need, and I think I like the 4 big agenda. It just not talks about food, but it talks about food, a nutritional food. And that's also a very good way of really addressing any viruses, even beyond COVID-19. So on top of doing the masks, I do agree with you, Anne, we have to do this social distancing. Let's get the job, and let's also look perhaps in terms of the food and drinks we have. So I really wanted to emphasize the point Anne was bringing, the point of thinking inwardly. I think it's a very good point. As a nation, we need to really make that direction.
And of course, Anne, you also mentioned about the President's State of the Nation address. People who are trading outside the country, they're actually benefiting more. They've made more profits. And we know well under President Kenyatta's administration, also the country experienced growth, as it were, some growth in some sector, while national borrowing went up astronomically as his administration sought to plug the huge infrastructure deficit. The country's public debt still stands at 7.79 trillion shillings, representing 68.1% of GDP, a fact that is worrying for the economic planners. Well, let's look at some of the numbers during the 2 terms that we've had the president in office, starting with the jobs created since 2013 to date at 2.741 million. Also, we have taxes collected, which are at a whopping 1.56 trillion shillings. The country's GDP now at 11 trillion shillings. Also, we have a total of 8.6 million Kenyans connected to electricity. Let's see what health is also portending during the 2 terms. The spend now in health spending, now we have it in the region of 121.1 billion. Road constructed at 21,700 kilometers of tarmac. This is the projection that we had as well, but the thorn that is really pricking us right now is that debt, as it were, that we can see we're still grappling with it, but nonetheless, good numbers, good figures. The tickling question as well that I should be asking you is GDP the proper metrics of measuring the growth of a country? Because this has been a debate that is there. People are saying, no, that is not the proper metrics of measuring the growth of a country. Maybe you should even look at the Human Development Index, as it were. Let's just begin with you, Professor, on this particular, or Sakwa, because we've just spoken, Professor.
Yeah. Go to Meshimiwa.
I don't go to Meshimiwa. So, you are the professor. You can tell us, is it like the proper metrics of measuring the growth of a country?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I think it's the best we have now.
Is the best we have?
But there are a lot of, yes, like every measure that attempts to aggregate in a single number a lot of variables, there will be a lot of criticisms of its representativeness of the universe you are looking at.
But to bat it, just Mheshimiwa, people will say, yes, we can see there is growth here as far as GDP is concerned, but if I'm looking at my pockets,
precisely,
that particular growth is not really translated to what is inside here.
Yes, precisely. I must say something. That's the problem when you have a single figure. People are saying, I don't feel it. For example, if you ask people during the last quarter where we had 10%, 10 plus growth, did it make a difference? You may not see that. One country in the world, Bhutan, a small country to the northeast of India, does not use GDP. It uses something about a happiness index. There are issues, but of course this is, it's also deep into their culture. I don't think that has caught on in the rest of the world. However, around the GDP figures in economics, and the professor can elaborate on this even better, he's more current, in economics, the distribution aspects, how far, how many people are impacted, the quality, that's the quality of the GDP figures, matters as well. You can get a GDP grow very rapidly because, for example, with a huge infrastructure, which may not have as much of an employment effect as if that money had, say, gone into promoting SMEs or rural sector support or health or something like that, that the quality of the GDP depends on the distributive quality of that particular number. And that's why we argue a lot as for whether, in fact, it represents or not. But I think in terms of the income of a nation, not the wealth, just a change in income of a nation during a year, GDP is still the best one to tell us how far we have moved up income-wise or not. And then, if people still say I have no money in the pocket, we should ask ourselves, why is our GDP growing and there's no money in the pocket? And then you come back now to the issues of distribution. Are we concentrating, like for example, oil economies? You can get the GDP of a country soar to the clouds, but people are still poor. Why? Because you can generate it in a fairly narrow spectrum, and the rest of the people are not participating. That's why investments that bring in a large number of people to participate, to create jobs, to create incomes, to bring in these households, that's what matters. But you can still have growth without doing these things that we are talking about.
Right, and don't you think maybe, don't you think maybe the purchasing power index would be more apropos as a good metrics to as compared to GDP?
I will start by saying I think the GDP just says part of the story. What I think that what I have experienced or what I see is this is telling the story that the economy is growing, but who are the people who are benefiting? And I always say from my experience on the ground and working with the business community, it is the foreign investors who are benefiting. It's the chosen few. It's the chosen few and the foreigners who are benefiting. We're seeing all the money happening, going in the infrastructure, but it's the business community getting it. It's the Wanjiku on the ground feeling it. And so we are seeing the growth of this country, and I can tell you a lot of money has been put in, a lot of development is happening, but it's only going to the foreigners and the chosen few. And we have to find a way for this to be distributed all the way down. We need to support our business community so that they can be able to create wealth for themselves and create jobs. On the ground, things are different. The numbers, I mean, this is the only metrics we can use for sure, but when we go on the ground, I can tell you it's very, very painful for a lot of these business community people because there is no money on the ground. They are just barely surviving. They're barely surviving. So I think this is not a true indication of what's happening in the economy, but it's the best we have.
So it's not a true indication of what is really happening in the economy.
No, it's
so
not.
We should not be, happy-go-lucky, we are growing as a country because the GDP has risen by, 0.3 from 2020. So that is not a point of happiness at all. So the so where is the true card of the real situation on the ground, Professor?
I like this discussion, and there's something you're presenting there. There's a lot of counting of money, and I'm getting excited, but I know I won't get it. But I think there are things we need to, I agree with it, and GDP perhaps is something we need to unpack, and how do we get it? And I'm good that my two colleagues started this. There are various measures you can actually look at the country, about 3 perhaps, and I will end up with the last one. The first one is you can look at income per capita. Income per capita. That's perhaps provide a better measure. Perhaps more important is the PPP, purchasing power parity, which actually say if I have a shilling and I'm in Mexico or whatever, how much can it buy and when I'm here? So that's a better measure of that. But more importantly, perhaps, and I think, Anne, you are right, you are spot on, what we have as a good measure beyond the GDP is what we call Gini coefficients.
Yes.
A Gini coefficient provides an opportunity of how the wealth is distributed. If you look at a country like South Africa, it has the highest, 63% of the Gini coefficient. Kenya, we are now, we in the early 2007-8 there, we used to do about 40. Now I think we are doing about 44 there, which actually indicates that the gap is widening between in terms of wealth. So GDP, yes, it's a good aspect, and I think we need to be extremely careful and see beyond the number we are told. If perhaps just a simple homework, plot the GDP for the last 10 years between developed economies and developing economies. You see the developing economies shooting 8, 10, and developed economies, I'll be surprised if the GDP goes beyond 3%. Look at that narrative. This is not going beyond 3%. If you look at it in terms of quality of life, therefore the way of the distribution, it is pretty high. So that puts a lot of question mark. And I'm always like, are we told GDP is grown and therefore we are learning with it? Yes, we are doing off with the GDP. We need to go back and look at, it's something which came out today here. Very interesting, as I came in, I heard that the news saying that the KPA, there are a lot of people being employed from one tribe.
Yes, sir. We'll come to that.
And it's interesting because which that tribe is, and we would like to want to see, am I just calculating a simple average or I'm weighting it? There have become more people in this country of that. I don't know the group.
But you should also consider maybe where that particular company is domiciled. Yeah, who are the people around there? Yeah, that would be another.
Yeah, I hear you, Diba, but I think you need to be careful. Are we looking for where you come from? Are we looking for the skills to make KPA a better place? Because if I get the skills from wherever, and KPA does well, the whole country benefits. I think that's something new. But there's something I want to bring about the president speech. The cartoon in The Nation yesterday was a bit concerned. I think we also need to be a bit mature in terms of how we look at things. I think there's something we need to look at. I see the president emphasize so much about the investments. That's cool. That's great. But I think it's a time as a country we now need to look. These investments are in need of what? The bottom line, the same thing you're asking about GDP. These investments are in looking the quality life of our people. The Vision 2030, very clear. So we can talk about, yes, we have done a lot of roads, we have done this, we have done that, but I think we need to look how to have they translated in. However, there's still the elephant in the room, which we really needed to focus on. And we cannot run away from the issue of utilization, efficient utilization of the taxpayers' money. I think that's something perhaps
of the taxpayers' money. Yeah, also we'll come to the tax revenue generation as well. So we have, yes, KRA really happy that they've hit their mark as far as tax generation revenue generation is concerned, but at what expense? But before we go there, let me go just hear what SACCO has to say, especially on the G coefficient, because that will be the ideal index actually to measure, you know, the growth of a country, as it were, because it brings very clearly the demarcation line between the rich and the poor. We can see the rich will, you know, going upper and upper, but the wide berth between them and the poor is worsening. A big chasm over there. G coefficient.
Yeah.
Isn't that the proper metric?
Yes, but it's far too technical. The problem with
it is far too technical?
Yes, it's very technical.
But why are we having all these economists that we have in this country, you know, domiciled at the Treasury?
The late Professor Ominde actually unpacked it so well, Sakwa. It's not rocket science. It's probably something to understand.
I understand that. But I say that from a point of knowledge about how people react to these things. You remember 6 years ago, the Treasury was at the front end of saying we can't use GDP, debt to GDP to measure how we are performing in respect of debt, because who understands GDP, they said. GDP is too complicated. We just use a figure. So simplicity is what they were searching. But I think if we understood the Gini coefficient and what it measures, in terms of the distribution of income, the skewedness or the lack of it in the distribution of income, we would not be fearing, like I see now people talking about, if you mention something about the poor and the rich, they think that you are going to create a revolution. You see, it's that depth of misunderstanding. I know that's in the context of the politics going on now, but it's been a deliberate discussion. And Kenya, since independent, and Prof, I think you'll be more up to date on the numbers that we have now. As you mentioned, 44, I wasn't aware where the number lies right now. Kenya was one of the most unequal societies. We used to be compared with Brazil at the time. So the kind of development that you have, how expansive it is among households, would define finally what kind of Gini coefficient you end up with. If it is skewed in one area, and as I said, mineral exploitation is one that is easy to use as an example. If we had struck fuel in Turkana and we are now we're exporting so much, Kenya would be richer, GDP would grow, but the rest of the country would remain poor. That Gini coefficient would worsen. So, but if people can understand it, if we can begin to use it more frequently, I think people will pick it up. And it could be one way, a qualitative way of looking at the outcomes of our development.
Yes, of looking at the outcome. And what will be your take?
I think it's been said it all, but I will go back to what he was saying about distribution of wealth. And the truth is if we have one part of the country, as you're talking about Turkana, and you say that this is where the money is and this is what it is, and we are making a lot of money in this way, in this particular region, and it will look like the country is making a lot of money, but it's going to be in the hands of very few. And Kenya is not an equal society. So what we need to keep doing is making sure that the distribution of wealth is actually happening where everyone in this country is able to benefit based on the resources that we have here, whether it's the agricultural resources, the mining resources, the financial resources that come in through the diaspora remittances. All of that has to trickle down, and I think that continuously is the challenge that we have. As I mentioned earlier, the money is always up with the chosen few, and majority of the people are not benefiting. And yet we have a lot of resources in this country, so we need to find a way to distribute this wealth in an even way. And I think that's the conversation. I mean, he's a politician. The conversation of the next election in 2022 is about the economy. It's all about the economy. How do we get people on the ground feeling it? Because Kenya is rich. Kenya is rich. And how comes it's only felt by the chosen few? We need to find a way that it's distributed so everyone has a base that they can feel that they are part of this country, they're making money, they're working hard, and they are able to benefit. So the key question is about distribution of wealth. How do we create jobs?
How do we create it? We need to take a short break. Yeah, Prof, I need to just butt in a bit. We take a short break, then when we circle back, we shall continue with that. And also the biggest question about the remittance of cash here in the country from the diaspora, which is exorbitantly high. And we know what the remittance from the diaspora is doing in this country. That is the biggest chunk that is driving this economy as well. But the cost of remittance stands at 2 billion shillings, a month. That is a question that we need to be broaching and, of course, discuss with our panelists as well. Don't go away. You're watching Sokoni Prime here on Morning Prime.